Senator Simons.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So let us start with the good news. The government has indeed accepted most of this chamber's amendments to Bill C-11, amendments from all 4 Senate groups. The government has accepted, for example, a small but crucial amendment proposed by our colleague Senator Denise Batters, which clarifies and expands the legal meaning of the word decision in the Act. It has accepted an amendment from our colleague Senatrice Miville-Dechêne, which underlines the right to privacy following recommendations from Canada's Privacy Commissioner. This is a real victory and a pleasant surprise since the government opposed this amendment in committee. The government has accepted a whole series of amendments proposed by our colleague Senatrice Bernadette-Clément, which stress the importance of Black and Indigenous representation in Canada's broadcast ecosystem. They have accepted an important amendment by Senator Pamela Wallin, adding critical language that ensures freedom of expression and journalistic independence, and equally important language from Senator Donna Dasko, which insists that our broadcast system promote innovation, be adaptable to technological change, and responsive to audience choice. Senator René Cormier's contributions include amendments to support French-Canadian broadcasting and to underline the importance of independent producers. And Senator Cormier and Senator Jim Quinn have proposed successful amendments to make the CRTC more transparent and accountable in the administration of this new regulatory framework. I'm pleased to see 2 amendments that I championed in partnership with my friend Senator Donna Dasko included in the revised legislation. The first relieves community broadcasters of responsibility for combating disinformation. The second, far more substantive, was an amendment to remove in its entirety Section 7 sub 7 of the Act, which would have given extraordinary new powers to the Governor and Council to micromanage all kinds of CRTC decisions. Several expert witnesses testified before our committee about their concerns that this section would give new, unprecedented powers for Cabinet to intervene in the rulings of the independent broadcast regulator. And I'm delighted that the government and the other place accept this amendment, which depoliticizes regulatory decision-making. Let me take this opportunity, too, to thank not just the witnesses, but our former colleague, Senator Howard Whetstone, for his wise counsel as Senator Dasko and I worked on this vital section of the bill. Senator Whetstone's deep knowledge of regulatory law was incredibly helpful as we wrestled with ways to fix this particular issue. That's the good news, and I don't want to minimize its importance. C-11 came to us a flawed bill, and by working together, the Standing Senate Committee on Transport and Communications created a better bill. It's a credit to our more independent, less partisan Senate that we've been able to deal with some of C-11's most glaring omissions and errors. But the other place failed to accept the one amendment that may have been the most critical of all, the amendment proffered by Senatrice Miville-Dechêne with my support, which would have clearly scoped out user-generated content from this bill. One of the challenges of this legislation was to find a compromise that would include corporate content across all major streaming platforms, including YouTube and TikTok, while at the same time not capturing individual artists, creators, journalists, and social and political commentators who use these platforms to upload their content. We needed to find a way to ensure that commercially released Canadian music on YouTube, TikTok, and other platforms was captured by C-11 without sweeping up independent individual creators who use the platforms to reach audiences, build their brands, and earn their livings. We needed to find a way to protect the rights of commercial recording artists and at the same time protect the rights of cutting-edge digital entertainment innovators. Senatrice Miville-Dechêne and I thought we had found that compromise. We didn't do it alone. We were supported by our excellent staff who helped to craft and shape the language of the amendment after months and months of consultation with independent creators, artistic lobby groups, and the platforms themselves. The legislation sent back to us today gives the CRTC the power to override the section of the bill which exempts user-generated content based in part on whether that content generates revenues directly or even indirectly, which could, in theory, capture a tremendous amount of user-generated content. Our rejected amendment to Section 4.2 sub 2 would have eliminated all mention of revenues, be they direct or indirect. Instead, its metric would have been whether a piece of content had been broadcast on a conventional commercial service or whether it had an international unique identifier number assigned to it as a professional commercial recording. And I want to be very, very clear about this because there seems to be some confusion. Our amendment specifically made allowance for things like the rebroadcast of sports games or the rebroadcast of an entertainment show like a singing competition. Our amendment would have meant that if a broadcaster such as Rogers or CBC reposted a baseball game or a news documentary to YouTube or Facebook, that would have absolutely been captured by the legislation. as would have any other parallel use of a social media platform to mirror that which was already on a conventional broadcast service. And it is absolutely incorrect. It is absolutely incorrect to suggest that our amendment only dealt with music. That is not true. But our suggested language would also have ensured that if a major record label such as Sony released a new single or album on YouTube, that posting would have been treated as would have been the release of that same song on Spotify or Amazon or Tidal. At the same time, digital creators, including financially successful ones, would have been clearly exempted from C-11, even if they uploaded their comedy or music or animation or film or TV episodes to a social media platform. In committee, our common sense compromise amendment was accepted by a significant majority of members, endorsed by the majority of senators in this chamber, and it was embraced and celebrated by digital creators across the country, by producers, by academics and media critics and analysts, and it received broad and enthusiastic public support. Unfortunately, the government has not seen fit to accept it, despite its efforts to strike a reasonable balance. Here's the official language for the official reason, and I quote, "This would affect the Governor and Council's ability to publicly consult on and issue a policy direction to the CRTC to appropriately scope the regulation of social media services with respect to their distribution of commercial programs, as well as prevent the broadcasting system from adapting to technological changes over time." And what exactly does that mean? If, like me, you have a bit of a thing about split infinitives, that was especially painful to read and hear. But grammatic pedantry aside, let me attempt to translate. The government is saying, I think, that our amendment would limit Cabinet's power to tell the CRTC how to regulate social media services. Now, the first part of the sentence is a bit strange. Nothing in our amendment would have prevented the government from holding public consultations at any time on any subject. The last clause is also a bit odd. Nothing in our amendment would have prevented the broadcasting system from adapting to technological change. But it's the middle of the sentence that matters. It's the meat of the sandwich. The part about scoping the regulation of commercial programs on social media. And this is precisely the problem. The minister and government keep telling us and everyone else that they do not intend to include user-generated content, and the Canadians who post their comedy sketches or animated shorts or children's songs to Twitter, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram would not be scoped into the ambit of the CRTC, and yet the government's own written response to our amendment demonstrates that they wish to retain the power to direct the CRTC to do precisely that, to regulate the distribution of content on social media. The government has accused us of creating a loophole, but in fact it's exactly the other way around. It's section 4.2 sub 2 which creates the loophole. The government can't have its cake and eat it too. It can't pledge to keep user-generated social media out while simultaneously leaving open the possibility, dare I say the threat, of shoehorning it in. Senator Gold has said to us today that using a social media service does not make you a broadcaster, and that is absolutely true. Would that the bill said so. And so now we are left with a constitutional quandary. Do we send the bill back and insist, with all due parliamentary politeness, that the government reconsider our amendment? We have pinged, now should we pong? Or do we say to the government, well, on your head be it. We in the Senate identified a real and serious failing of this bill. We suggested a practical, nonpartisan compromise, which achieved broad consensus in the Senate. You didn't listen. And now you, as the elected representatives, accountable to the voters, will have to deal with the consequences of that. When a bill or a part of the bill is clearly unconstitutional, then our way is clear. It is our job in the Senate to protect the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, including freedom of expression. But while I think that section 4.2 sub 2 does impinge on free speech and free expression, it doesn't explicitly infringe on free expression. And despite the ongoing social media panic, the rage farming, the thought scams, this is not a censorship act. It is not a plot by the World Economic Forum. It's not a communist plot. It's not a Nazi plot. And it's not an Orwellian plot. It's just, well, a flawed bill. But this is the bill the government ran on. In terms of the Salisbury Convention, it was very much part of their last election platform. You could argue that they received a mandate for this policy, though this was hardly a ballot question. So while I might be tempted to ask you, my fellow senators, to send this bill back with an insistence that the government reconsider our amendment, I frankly don't detect any appetite in the other place to budge on this point. More's the pity. And I don't think ponging this amendment up the street will make a blind bit of difference. I'm proud of the work we did on this bill, and I think it is a much better piece of legislation because of that work. In the end, I do not feel I can lend my voice to its passage. But today I want to thank all the independent digital creators, the animators, filmmakers, musicians, comedians, journalists, and commentators who spoke out so thoughtfully against this particular aspect of the legislation. You give so much to our country and to our culture. I will continue to push for your rights and your independence to be respected in government regulation and by the CRTC. We need your visions and your voices in our media milieu. Thank you for what you give to Canada and to the world. Thank you for being ambassadors for all things Canadian and for all the multiplicity of ways to be Canadians. You are in the vanguard, and I hope in time the rest of us will catch up. Merci encore, et hi hi.